Cheers, guys. Epix 911, welcome to the Saturday, February 11th, 2017 edition of VR News. I want to start quickly, just talk about yesterday's video. Rubbed a few people the wrong way because of the headline. Part of it read, Valve's Gabe confirms 3 VR games in the works. There was no, meaning to mislead anybody, clickbaity type thing. I honestly, literally just forgot to mention. No excuse that I also had it on the picture, which I did, and also no excuse that it was only one line. But it was. I was simply going to say pretty much what the text said, that it's in the works. There's no other details. As they become available, I'll report on them. So apologies to those who felt I was misrepresenting. All I can say is absolutely not. I screwed up. I forgot. And that's going to happen from time to time. I try to minimize it, but a lot of work goes into these, and it's a daily thing, and I enjoy it, but that doesn't mean it's going to be perfect every single time. Not even close, as you guys can tell. All right, let's talk about model train sets. There was a time about 2 months ago, I talked about a time in the past where the baby boomer generation couldn't wear their geek on their sleeve like we do. These were, toy train sets were things you did after the family was asleep. You'd go to the basement, put on the conductor's hat, etc. Well, now, via virtual reality, we get the unfortunately named Derail Valley Train. But I gotta say, the graphics look pretty damn good. They look really good. I would say better than even the Euro Truck Simulator, which I thought looked pretty decent, considering the epic scope of what it's trying to cover. And not only were the graphics good, it looks very comprehensive. I mean, there's a lot that goes into the train hobby. It's not my thing, but I can understand the appeal. There's rare collectors, cabooses, and, different trains that the collectors try to acquire. There's diorama building. There's a lot of aspects to it. This simulator allows you to do a lot of the onboard stuff. You might have a model train set, but what would it feel like to actually ride in it? Well, with this application, Derail Valley Train, you could try that out. So I think for people who are into that, this is going to be a boon. It's going to be freaking amazing. If there's anybody out there who's into trains that happens to see this and you also have VR and get this, please let the rest of us know how it is. All right. There was a recent expo in Japan called Jaepo 2017. Along with VR being pretty much standard this year in terms of arcade machines built around VR, whereas last year they were experimental, there was another neat little aspect that came out of it, and it had to do with the controls. One of the reasons that VR can work well in an arcade environment is simply because, for us as PC gamers, it's been gamepad, mouse, keyboard for the longest time. Then you get virtual reality, and you've got Vive controllers, touch controllers, third party. There's all kinds of different ones. That's always been something that arcade games have been about, different control architecture. There are so many different proprietary controls out there, the Tron arcade cabinet, etc. Yeah, it is a nice fit, and I think people who are into that as a hobby, the arcade aspect, the learning curve for the controls is going to be way less steep for them because it's something they're used to taking in stride via the arcade machines. So yeah, that was Jaepo 2017. Next year, I'm going to try to catch news from that because I didn't see much reported on it. Now, this is an interesting article. Yeah, it's another patent filing, and we know just because it's a patent filing doesn't mean it's going to amount to anything. But what makes this one so damn interesting is the tracking for this patent. So Sony put this up, and it looks very, very much like HTC Vive's room scale. So I thought that was kind of neat. And what it does is it outlines a Vive-Like beam projector that uses lights and mirrors to create a device tracking play area. Now, we know that the regular PlayStation VR, of course, uses the camera. And other than the fact that they've rounded the chassis compared to the older square one, it's essentially the same camera. Now, it's unclear if this patented tech is going to be used or able to be used with current VR headsets, or if they're maybe aiming for hardware in the future. Hopefully more of this comes to light, but interesting that they're looking at that type of a tracking solution. Let's talk about Valve. Valve, and the reason I mention this is it's not directly a VR article, but it does, or rather it will impact it, because we've had a lot of discussion on this channel about the disservice that the Greenlight program has had. It was a system that ultimately was pretty easy to game. Yes, it was vote-based, but we know votes can be absolutely manipulated. And the problem with that is you get instances where you could get saturation, where there are so many bad VR games, it's hard for somebody to sort through and find the gems. Now, there are a lot of gems in there, absolutely. But for every gem, there's a handful of crap. And I don't mean that to be rude. I literally mean crap. They're not good. So what they're thinking of doing is moving to a program called Steam Direct. And this will be a pay to put up on their store model. They haven't finalized the pricing at all, or the costs rather, to the developers, but they asked for feedback, and everything from $50 up to the low thousands has been suggested. Now, obviously, the thousands would be extremely cost prohibitive for people without a lot of finances. There are some very talented indie authors out there that this would kill them, and it would mean they probably wouldn't get to post. So I can't help but think somewhere in the middle of all of that, there's a better solution. But it almost seems like they've gone from one extreme to the other without trying to find some middle ground. But let me know what your guys' thoughts are on that. It's been a common complaint. We've had a lot of games. Remember, that count was 1,000 when I talked about it 2 months ago. Who knows how many now? 1,500 VR games? But how many are actually good? And that's the key. And I'm not so sure Steam Direct, the new method, is necessarily going to see that change much, other than make it cost prohibitive. And the only way that would work is if the devs that would create, the crappy game have no money. I suppose that would keep them at bay, but money isn't the answer, I don't think, on this one. All right. Next up, a crane simulator. This was an article on Road to VR. And what's interesting about this is it ties in directly with what we've talked about with regards to training in virtual reality or tutorials in virtual reality. Here is a simulator of a crane that not only could lower costs for the company behind it, because you don't have to hire the equipment or have the equipment, have somebody spend the time out there. There's a lot of overhead associated with that. Now, with that said, nothing beats working on the real equipment, at least so far. But hell, NASA had simulators, and as long as the simulators are accurate, yeah, I think it's a great thing. So the company is called Industrial Training International, and their application is called VR Mobile Crane Simulator. And they plan on showing that at the Con Expo in Vegas for March. And right now it's using Rift in combination with a modular rig in order to, as they say, reduce the costs of training compared to real world and older VR solutions. And what's also interesting for any fellow Canadians out there, it was actually created in partnership with Canadian developer Sirius Labs Incorporated. So yeah, look for that. There's been a beta apparently since October. March is when it's expected to launch. All right, guys, that is it for the news on this Saturday. As always, cheers.